The pill bottle was cold in my hand. Colder than it should have been, like it had been sitting in a freezer instead of a nightstand drawer. I heard the front door click shut. Soft. Careful. The kind of quiet that means someone doesn't want to be heard. Then his fingers wrapped around my wrist. Thin, papery, but stronger than I expected, and he pulled me down close to his mouth. After your son leaves, he whispered, don't drink anything he pours you. I didn't move. I didn't ask why. I just stared at the bottle in my hand and listened to my own heartbeat count the seconds. He let go of my wrist and closed his eyes like the effort had cost him everything he had left. I still didn't know what he meant. Not yet. My name is Diane Whitfield. I'm 61 years old, and for 34 years I ran a commercial cleaning company out of a two-bay garage in Dayton, Ohio, until it grew into something with 42 employees and contracts with 3 hospital systems. I built Whitfield Facility Services from nothing but a mop bucket, a used Ford Econoline van, and a fear of going back to the diner job I'd worked at 19. By the time this story starts, the business was worth just under $2.1 million on paper, and I had $340,000 sitting in a money market account I'd been quietly building for 11 years, my exit fund, the thing that was supposed to let me retire without asking anyone for permission. The man whose hand grabbed my wrist that night was Harold Bennett, 83 years old, my next-door neighbor of 19 years. No blood relation. Just a widower with bad knees and a garden he could no longer kneel in, whose medications I'd been quietly paying for and picking up from the pharmacy for the past 2 years, about $410 a month, after his own daughter stopped returning his calls. And the son he was warning me about was mine. Tyler Whitfield, 31 years old, who had moved back into my house 4 months earlier with his new girlfriend, Priya, promising it was just until we get back on our feet. I didn't know yet that getting back on their feet meant standing on mine. It was a Tuesday, and I came home early because a client canceled a walkthrough. I parked on the street instead of the driveway, an old habit from when I used to sneak up on lazy shift workers back in my 20s, checking whether they actually mopped the break rooms or just wet the mops and called it done. Old habits catch things. Through the kitchen window, I could see Tyler in one of my dress shirts, not his, mine, the navy one I wore to Chamber of Commerce dinners, pouring himself a glass of the 18-year Macallan I kept in the china cabinet for closing big contracts. Priya sat across from him at my table, laptop open, scrolling through what I would later learn was my company's accounting software. She still thinks the business is worth $2 million, Tyler said, swirling the scotch like he'd seen it done in a movie. By the time we're done restructuring it, on paper it'll be worth about $400,000. Easy transfer. She'll sign whatever I put in front of her. She trusts me. Priya laughed, a short, sharp laugh, the kind you give when you think no one's really listening. And the old man next door? He's not going to be a problem. Harold's 83 and half-deaf, Tyler said. He's not a problem. He's a rounding error. I stood on my own porch, keys still in my hand, and I did not walk in. I turned around, got back in my car, and drove around the block twice before I trusted my hands enough to hold the wheel straight. I started small. That Thursday, while Tyler was at what he called a networking lunch, I opened my own laptop and checked the login history on the accounting software. Someone had accessed it 4 times in the past 2 weeks from a device I didn't recognize, always between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m., hours I was asleep. When I asked Tyler about it that night, casual, over dinner, he didn't even look up from his plate. Oh, that's just me helping you modernize your bookkeeping, Mom. Your old system is a liability. You're basically one audit away from a nightmare. I'm cross-referencing everything into a cleaner ledger structure, so if you ever want to sell, the valuation actually reflects reality instead of inflated legacy assets. It sounded smart. It sounded like something a business degree would say. I nodded, said thank you, and went to bed telling myself I was being paranoid. 2 weeks later, I drove to my accountant's office under the excuse of a routine review, something I'd genuinely done every quarter for a decade, so it raised no flags. My accountant, Marcus, pulled up a new LLC that had been registered 6 weeks prior, Whitfield Holdings Group. The registered agent was Tyler. The listed address was my house. Did you set this up, Diane? Marcus asked. I told him no. I told him I needed him to say nothing to anyone yet. I confronted Tyler that weekend, keeping my voice light, like I was asking about a broken dishwasher instead of my life's work. Sweetheart, what's Whitfield Holdings Group? He barely blinked. It's a pass-through entity, Mom. A lot of family businesses restructure this way for estate planning purposes. It minimizes tax exposure and protects the operational business from personal liability. It's completely standard. I actually got the idea from a wealth management seminar. I was going to walk you through it once the framework was finalized. I didn't want to overwhelm you with the legal language before it was ready. I told him that made sense. I told him I trusted him. I even hugged him. Then I drove to a lawyer 30 miles outside of town, somewhere no one in my circle would recognize the name on the office door. That was the night I overheard them in the kitchen. The two of them not knowing the baby monitor I still had plugged in from watching Harold's blood pressure numbers on a shared app was also, by pure accident of Wi-Fi range, picking up audio from the kitchen speaker Tyler had gifted me for Christmas. She's basically a rounding error herself at this point, Priya said, and I heard ice clink in a glass. 61. No husband. No other kids checking in on her. Who's going to ask questions? The holdings group filing goes through next month, Tyler said. Once the business assets transfer, I convert her house into collateral for the SBA loan for our own operation. She keeps living in it. She just doesn't own it anymore. She'll never even notice the difference day to day. And the old man? I told you. Rounding error. I sat in my dark bedroom with my hand over my mouth so they wouldn't hear me breathing. The next morning, I went to see Harold, ostensibly to bring his refilled prescriptions. He was slower than usual, his color bad, but his eyes were sharp. You heard something last night, he said. It wasn't a question. I asked him how he knew what I was going to tell him about the warning he'd given me weeks earlier. Harold told me his daughter, before she stopped speaking to him, had done almost the identical thing to his brother 11 years ago, a shell company, a restructuring. A house signed away disguised as an estate planning maneuver. His brother lost everything and died in an assisted living facility Harold still paid $600 a month toward, out of guilt, because he hadn't seen the pattern in time to stop it. I've been watching that boy come and go for 4 months, Harold said. I know the walk. I know the smile. I buried a version of him already, Diane. I'm not letting you bury yourself the same way. I made a decision that night. Sitting at my kitchen table with the lights off, I would become smaller than I was. Starting the next morning, I let my shoulders round slightly when Tyler talked business at me. I asked questions I already knew the answers to. Now, remind me, honey, what's a pass-through entity again? And let my voice trail off like I'd lost the thread. I started leaving my reading glasses pushed up on my head instead of on my face when documents came out, squinting instead, letting a small crease of confusion sit between my eyebrows. I stopped correcting Tyler's numbers out loud, even when I caught the errors instantly, and instead wrote them down later on a legal pad I kept locked in Harold's garden shed, because I knew Tyler would never think to look for anything of mine at the neighbor's house. Internally, I was doing math I hadn't done since I built spreadsheets by hand for my first 10 cleaning contracts. If Tyler thought I was fading, a little forgetful, a little tired, a little eager to hand off the burden of the business to someone younger and sharper, he would stop being careful. Confidence makes people sloppy. I had built a company by outworking men who underestimated a woman with a mop bucket. I could outquiet a son who underestimated his own mother. I started calling myself, in my own head, the rounding error. It kept me steady. It reminded me exactly what he thought I was worth. I set the bait on a Sunday. I told Tyler, over coffee, in my softest and most tired voice, that I decided to simplify things and had left a signed limited power of attorney in the top drawer of my office desk, the drawer that didn't lock, giving him authority over day-to-day business decisions while I took some time to rest. It was real. It was also worthless, notarized under a clause my lawyer had built specifically to trigger a paper trail. Any use of that power of attorney to transfer, encumber, or retitle real property or business assets would automatically flag with the county recorder's office and simultaneously generate a certified notice to my attorney and to Marcus. I also asked Marcus to leave one specific, deliberately vulnerable-looking gap in the Whitfield Facility Services books, an unreconciled $80,000 discrepancy in accounts receivable that looked, to an amateur eye, like an opportunity to quietly divert funds without anyone noticing before an audit. It was bait. Every dollar of it was tracked. Then I bought a small wireless camera disguised as a phone charging block and plugged it into the kitchen outlet, angled toward the table where Tyler and Priya did their planning. For 6 days, nothing happened. I kept my phone face down on the counter, the monitoring app running silent, and I went about my days playing tired, playing slow, bringing Harold his pills, watering my own garden with unsteady hands I didn't actually have. On the 7th night, my phone buzzed once under a dish towel while I sat 2 feet away at the table pretending to read a magazine. I didn't look at it. I just felt it, and I knew. I planned the dinner myself. 45th wedding anniversary of my late sister's marriage. A tradition our extended family still kept even after she passed. A reason for aunts, cousins, and old family friends to gather at my house. 22 people at 2 long tables in my backyard under string lights I'd hung myself the day before, my hands steadier than they'd let anyone see in weeks. Harold sat at the end of the table nearest the house, a blanket over his knees, a glass of ginger ale in front of him that he never once let anyone refill for him. Tyler stood to make a toast around 7:40 p.m., glass raised, voice warm with the particular confidence of a man who believes he has already won. To my mom, he said, who's been slowing down a little this year, but who taught me everything about hard work, and who trusts me enough now to help carry some of that weight. I think it's time we all say it out loud. Mom's stepping back from the business, and I'm stepping up. Priya raised her glass too, smiling at the table. She's earned the rest. Somebody's got to keep things running while she takes it easy. I let the silence sit for exactly 3 seconds. Then I stood up. I didn't raise my voice. I never do. Power doesn't need volume. It needs precision. Tyler, I said, I'd like to thank you for something too. For the Whitfield Holdings Group filing you registered on March 3rd, using my address without my signature. For the 4 late-night logins to my accounting software between March 12th and March 20th. For telling Priya, in my own kitchen, on the night of April 9th, that I was, and I quote, a rounding error. The table went silent in the particular way 22 people go silent when they realize they walked into something they weren't warned about. Tyler's smile cracked. Mom, you're confused. I'm not confused, I said. I've been playing confused. There's a difference, and you taught me the value of it yourself, watching you underestimate me for 4 months. I reached into the tote bag by my chair and set 2 things on the table, a manila folder and a small black speaker no bigger than a deck of cards. This, I said, tapping the folder, is the LLC filing, the login records, and 11 days of camera footage from my own kitchen. I pressed play on the speaker. Tyler's voice came out clean and unmistakable. She's basically a rounding error herself at this point. Priya's laugh followed it, sharp and small, exactly as I remembered it. Nobody at the table moved. And this, I said, picking up the folder again, holding it in both hands, is the deed to my house, which you were 3 weeks away from using as collateral for a loan you never told me about. I tore it in half. Not the real deed. A certified copy, useless as a legal document. But the sound of paper ripping in a silent backyard landed exactly the way I needed it to. Harold, at the end of the table, allowed himself the smallest smile I'd seen on him in months. Headlights swept across the side yard a moment later. I'd called Marcus 2 hours earlier, and he'd called the county fraud unit that afternoon. The moment the flag power of attorney use came through on the recorder's notice, the trap I'd set a week prior had already triggered on its own that morning, when Tyler tried to use it to add his name to the business's line of credit. 2 officers walked around the side gate as calmly as if they were arriving for the dessert course. Tyler Whitfield, one of them said, we need to ask you a few questions about a filing with the county recorder's office. Priya's chair scraped back. She didn't run. There was nowhere to run to, in a backyard full of family who now knew exactly what she'd called an 83-year-old man behind his back. Within 6 weeks, the consequences arrived in the flat, procedural language of official letters and court dates. Tyler was charged with attempted fraud and unauthorized use of a power of attorney. Because the actual financial loss was intercepted before completion, his attorney negotiated it down to a plea of financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, a misdemeanor in our state given his lack of prior record, with restitution of $12,400 in legal and administrative fees and 200 hours of community service. It was less than he deserved. It was enough to put a permanent record next to his name that any future landlord, employer, or bank could find. Priya was never charged. She'd signed nothing, filed nothing, but she moved out of my house within 4 days, and word travels fast in a town the size of ours. Her new employer, a marketing firm two of my former clients used, quietly let her contract lapse at renewal. Nobody ever told me exactly why. I didn't ask. The Whitfield Holdings Group LLC was dissolved by court order within 30 days. My 42 employees never lost a single paycheck, a single contract, or a single hour of health coverage through any of it. I made sure of that personally, holding an all-staff meeting the week after the dinner to tell them, plainly, that the business was stable, that their jobs were safe, and that the only thing changing was my accountant's login credentials. Marcus and I set up a small hardship fund out of the $80,000 bait account once it was released back to the business. Real money now, no longer a trap, for any employee facing a medical emergency. 2 people used it within the first year. I never told either of them where the money came from. Harold's estranged daughter, hearing secondhand through a cousin about what had happened, called him for the first time in 3 years. He didn't tell me what she said. He just told me, over tea on his porch, that it was a start. It was late October, 6 weeks after the dinner, when I heard knocking at my front door during a cold, driving rain, the kind that turns a driveway into a river by 9 at night. Tyler stood on the porch without an umbrella, without a coat that fit the weather, a duffel bag at his feet that looked like everything he owned now fit inside it. His restitution payments had eaten through what little savings he'd had left after Priya moved out and took the furniture that had been in her name. "Mom," he said, and his voice cracked in a way I hadn't heard since he was 9 years old and had broken his arm falling off the shed roof. "Mom, please. I have nowhere else to go." I stood in the doorway with the porch light throwing yellow across the wet steps, and I let myself feel exactly what I felt. Not triumph, not the specific bitter satisfaction I might have expected 6 weeks earlier, just a tired, settled kind of clarity. "You have a place to go, Tyler," I said. "It's just not here. Not tonight. Maybe not for a long time. You need to build one, the way I built mine, slowly, honestly, and without anyone else's name on the paperwork." I closed the door, gently, not slammed. There was no need to slam it. The point had already been made once, at a table full of witnesses, and it didn't need repeating with volume. I found Harold in his kitchen 20 minutes later, kettle on, 2 mugs already out, because he'd seen the headlights and known I'd come. "You did the right thing," he said, sliding a mug across the table. "I know," I said. "It just doesn't feel like winning." "It's not supposed to," Harold said. "It's supposed to feel like peace. Winning is loud. This is quiet. Get used to quiet, Diane. It's better." I sat with him until the rain stopped, and for the first time in almost a year, I slept without checking the locks twice. Here's what I learned, the hard way, at 61 years old, after 34 years of building something with my own 2 hands. The people who call you a rounding error are usually the ones who most need you to believe it about yourself. Don't let anyone, not a son, not a daughter, not blood, not love, convince you that slowing down means shutting up. And if someone tells you not to drink what's poured for you, listen the first time. Have you ever had to play weak to protect something you built strong? Tell me about it in the comments. I read every one. If this story meant something to you, hit like, subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the next one.